After my husband cheated and blamed me for letting myself go post-kids, I calmly told him to leave, and 2 weeks later, he came crawling back in tears when his affair partner dumped him for being actually divorced. David and we were together for 12 years, married for 8. We built a life, had 2 amazing kids. Emma, who's 6, and Jake, who's 4. Up until recently, I honestly thought we had something solid. Like any couple, we had our ups and downs, sure. But I truly believed we were partners working towards the same dreams. He works in sales at a tech company, and I'm a nurse, always busy at the local hospital. Our schedules were crazy, but we made it work. When the kids were tiny, I took extended maternity leave for both of them. David was so supportive back then. He said he wanted me to bond with them to recover properly. Looking back now, I wonder if that was all just a polite performance, because what came later, it screamed that he felt something entirely different about those choices. And I need to be brutally honest about something that becomes really important later. Yes, my body changed after having kids. I gained weight during both pregnancies, and I didn't lose all of it. I went from a size 8 to a size 12. My body just looks different now. My stomach isn't flat, I have stretch marks, and my breasts are different after breastfeeding. But you know what? I was okay with those changes. They were the marks of creating and nourishing our children. I figured David understood that too, especially since he never said a single negative thing about my appearance. Not a word. The first real tremor, the first sign that something was deeply wrong, hit about 4 months ago. David started working late. A lot. It wasn't entirely unusual for his job, but the pattern was different. It wasn't just the occasional late night for a big project. He was regularly coming home after 8 p.m., and when he was home he was just distracted. Always on his phone, even during dinner with the kids. And if I dared ask about work, he'd get so defensive. Then came the nitpicking. He started being critical about little things around the house. Comments about dishes in the sink, toys left out. Even though our house has always been lived in, not some pristine museum. He'd complain dinner wasn't ready when he walked in, despite the fact that his schedule had become completely unpredictable. When I point out that I was working full-time too, and managing most of the childcare, he'd just sigh and say he was stressed about work, and didn't mean to take it out on me. The second glaring red flag? His sudden intense interest in fitness and appearance. David had never been particularly vain. But suddenly, he was at the gym every morning before work. A whole new wardrobe. A new haircut. Expensive skincare. Cologne. When I'd compliment him genuinely on looking good, he'd just make these little jokes about how at least one of us was making an effort. I just thought, okay, midlife crisis, he's trying to feel better about himself. So I tried to be supportive. Around that same time, David started making these subtle, insidious comments about my appearance, my habits. He'd suggest I might want to join him at the gym. He'd make remarks about what I was eating. For my birthday, instead of the jewelry or books I love, he bought me workout clothes. When I told him I was happy with my body, and honestly didn't have time for extensive workout routines between work and 2 young kids, he'd act like I was being defensive. He'd say he just wanted me to be healthy. The comments escalated slowly, gradually. He'd joke about how I lived in yoga pants and t-shirts, even though that's practical attire for chasing around 2 young kids and working 12-hour shifts at the hospital. He'd suggest I wear makeup more often, or do something different with my hair. When I point out that I was exhausted most of the time, and that my priorities were our family and my patients, not looking like some Instagram model, he'd just say I was making excuses. Things really started to spiral 2 months ago. David became distant, irritable, especially with the kids. He'd snap at Emma for normal 6-year-old behavior, and he seemed annoyed by Jake's need for attention and help with basic tasks. Weekends, he'd spend hours running errands, giving me vague answers about the gym, shopping, or meeting colleagues. Our physical relationship changed dramatically. He went from being normally affectionate to barely touching me. When I tried to initiate intimacy, he'd claim he was tired or stressed. The few times we were intimate, he seemed completely distracted, finishing quickly, without any consideration for my experience. When I tried to talk to him about feeling disconnected, he just said he was going through a difficult time at work and needed space. I started to suspect something was seriously wrong when David's behavior became obviously secretive. He'd take phone calls in another room. He guarded his phone constantly. He'd get defensive if I was anywhere near his computer. He even started showering immediately when he got home from work, which was new. When I asked about it, he said work made him feel gross, but it made no sense. He had a desk job in sales. The breaking point arrived 3 weeks ago on a Saturday evening. David had been running errands most of the day while I took care of the kids, cleaned the house, and prepared dinner. He came home around 7 p.m. in an obviously good mood. It was so unusual lately. He was humming, seemed relaxed, and was actually pleasant with the kids during dinner. I was cautiously optimistic. Maybe, just maybe, whatever had been bothering him was finally improving. After we put the kids to bed, I suggested we watch a movie together. Maybe talk about how disconnected we'd been feeling. I wasn't trying to start a fight. I genuinely wanted to reconnect with my husband, to figure out how to get back to a good place. David agreed, which surprised me, and we settled on the couch with some wine. I started the conversation gently. I said I'd noticed he seemed stressed and distant lately, and I asked if there was anything I could do to support him better. I told him I missed feeling close to him, and I just wanted to understand what was going on. David was quiet for a long time. I could see him weighing something in his mind. Finally, he said he'd been thinking a lot about our relationship and he wasn't happy. When I asked what specifically was making him unhappy, David launched into a speech that completely blindsided me. He said he felt like we'd become roommates instead of spouses. He said he didn't feel attracted to me anymore. He claimed I'd let myself go after having kids, and that he felt like he was married to a different person than the one he'd fallen in love with. He complained that I never made an effort with my appearance anymore, and that I'd become boring and focused only on the kids. I was so hurt, but I tried to stay calm to discuss his concerns rationally. I pointed out that my body had changed because I'd carried and delivered his children. I explained that my priorities had shifted because we had 2 young kids who needed care and attention. I told him I was willing to work on our relationship, but that I needed him to be realistic about what life looks like when you're parents of small children. That's when David dropped the real bombshell. He said he'd been seeing someone who made him feel like a man again, who reminded him what it was like to be with a woman who took care of herself. He said this other woman was exciting and fun, and actually made an effort to be attractive. He claimed he hadn't meant for it to happen, but that he couldn't help being drawn to someone who appreciated him and made him feel desired. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I asked how long this had been going on. About 3 months, he said. I asked who it was. A woman named Rebecca from his gym, he replied, who was recently divorced and understood what he was going through. I asked what exactly he thought he was going through, and he said it was the disappointment of watching his wife give up on herself and their relationship. David went on. Rebecca was 32, had no kids, and had maintained her figure. He said she dressed up when they went out, wore makeup, and actually seemed excited to see him. He said being with her reminded him of how relationships were supposed to feel, and it made him realize how much he'd been settling for in our marriage. And then the kicker. He said, any man in his position would have done the same thing. I just sat there, listening to this man I'd loved for 12 years, tell me that I deserved to be cheated on. Because my body bore the evidence of carrying his children. Because I prioritized those children's needs over looking like his fantasy. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed up with sick kids while he slept soundly. All the times I'd handled school events and doctor's appointments alone because of his work schedule. All the ways I'd supported his career and his dreams, putting my own on hold. But instead of crying, instead of begging him to reconsider, I felt something I hadn't expected. Clarity. Pure, undeniable clarity. I looked at David right into his eyes and I said, you're absolutely right. Any man who would cheat on his wife because her body changed after having his children, and then blame her for his choices, is not a man I want to be married to. Pack your bags. David's expression changed immediately. The smugness vanished. He stammered, saying he hadn't meant he wanted a divorce, just that we needed to work on our problems. He said he was willing to end things with Rebecca if I was committed to making changes and working on myself. He even suggested couples therapy might help us get back to a good place, but that I needed to acknowledge my role in our problems. I told David, my voice steady, your role in our problems was cheating on your wife and blaming her for it. My role was apparently being stupid enough to think I was married to a decent person. I told him I wasn't interested in therapy with someone who thought infidelity was a reasonable response to his wife not looking like a magazine cover after bearing his children. I told him to pack his things and get out of our house. He tried to backtrack desperately, said he was just being honest about his feelings, that all couples go through rough patches. He claimed he loved me and wanted to make our marriage work, but that required effort from both of us. He even had the audacity to say he was willing to forgive my neglect of our relationship if I was willing to forgive his mistake and work toward being the wife he'd fallen in love with. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and said, David, the wife you fell in love with was a 24-year-old with no children and no real responsibilities. And that person no longer exists, because she grew up and became a mother. I told him if he wanted to be with someone like Rebecca, he was free to do that, but not while married to me. I said I was done being blamed for his midlife crisis and his inability to handle the reality of adult life. David spent the next hour alternating between trying to convince me I was overreacting and getting angry that I wasn't willing to fight for our marriage. He said I was being dramatic, that plenty of couples work through infidelity. He accused me of giving up too easily, saying our kids deserve parents who are willing to put in effort to stay together. He called me selfish and short-sighted. I told David, my voice unwavering, that our kids deserve to see their mother being treated with respect, and I wasn't going to model accepting abuse for their sake. I said if he wanted to be with Rebecca so badly, he should go be with her, but he couldn't have both of us. I told him I was filing for divorce in the morning, and that he could communicate with me through lawyers from now on. He finally packed a bag and left around midnight, still insisting that I was making a huge mistake, that I'd regret not working on our marriage. He said I was going to struggle as a single mother, and that I'd realize how good I had it with him. He even threw in that Rebecca made him happy in ways I never had, and that I was too stubborn and proud to admit my faults and work on them. After David left, I called my sister. I told her everything. She came over immediately and stayed the night to help with the kids in the morning. And you know what? I was surprisingly calm, more relieved than devastated. I realized I'd been walking on eggshells around David's moods and his constant criticism for months without fully acknowledging how truly bad things had gotten. The next morning, I explained to Emma and Jake that Daddy was going to be living somewhere else for a while, and that sometimes families change but that both parents still love them very much. Emma, bless her heart, asked if it was because they'd been bad. My heart broke, but I assured her, with all the conviction I had, that this had absolutely nothing to do with them, and that they were perfect exactly as they were. Jake didn't fully understand, but he seemed to accept that Daddy would visit but not live with us anymore. I called the divorce attorney that Monday and scheduled a consultation. I also called my supervisor at the hospital and explained that I was going through a divorce and might need some flexibility with my schedule in the coming weeks. Everyone was incredibly supportive, and several colleagues shared their own experiences with divorce, offering practical advice. David texted constantly for the first week, alternating between apologies and blame. He'd send long messages about how he was sorry for hurting me, but that I needed to understand his perspective and be willing to work on our issues. He'd follow those up with angry texts about how I was being unreasonable and destroying our family over one mistake. I stopped responding after the third day and told him all communication needed to go through my attorney. The most satisfying part of this whole mess happened 2 weeks after David moved out. I was putting the kids to bed when I heard someone pounding on the front door, ringing the doorbell repeatedly. I looked through the peephole and saw David standing there, looking absolutely destroyed. He was crying. His hair was a mess. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. I opened the door, but I didn't invite him in. David immediately started sobbing, saying he'd made the biggest mistake of his life, and that he needed me to forgive him. He said Rebecca had broken up with him when she found out he was actually getting divorced, and not just having problems at home like he'd told her. Apparently, she wasn't interested in being with someone who was actually available and dealing with the reality of divorce and custody arrangements. David said Rebecca had told him she wasn't looking for anything serious, and definitely didn't want to deal with someone else's kids, or the drama of a divorce. She blocked him on social media and at the gym, and when he tried to talk to her, she told the staff he was harassing her. He said he realized that what they had wasn't real, and that he'd thrown away his family for someone who never actually cared about him. I just stood there, listening to David cry and beg for another chance. He promised he'd do anything to fix our marriage, to prove he was sorry. He said he'd been an idiot, and that he knew now that I was the best thing in his life. He said he wanted to come home and be the husband and father we deserved, and that he'd spend the rest of his life making up for his mistakes. I told David that I believed he was sorry, but I also told him, I'm not sorry anymore. I said I'd realized over the past 2 weeks how much happier and more peaceful I felt without his constant criticism and moodiness. I said our kids were actually more relaxed and fun to be around when they weren't walking on eggshells around his temper. And then I just laid it out for him. I decided I like being single better than being married to someone who blamed me for his own failures. David broke down completely. He said he couldn't live without us, that he'd learned his lesson. He promised he'd never cheat again, and that he'd appreciate me the way I deserved to be appreciated. He said he'd been going through some kind of midlife crisis and had made terrible decisions, but that he was ready to be better now. He begged me not to give up on our family. I told David that I wasn't giving up on our family. I was protecting it from him. I said the kids and I were a family with or without him, and that we were better off without someone who thought we were disposable when something shinier came along. I said he could see the kids according to whatever custody arrangement the court decided, but that our marriage was over. He asked if there was anything he could do to change my mind, and I told him honestly there wasn't. I said I'd lost all respect for him as a person and couldn't imagine ever trusting him again. I said even if I could forgive the cheating, I couldn't forgive him blaming me for it and trying to make me believe I deserved it. I said I wanted to be with someone who loved me as I am, not someone who thought I needed to earn his fidelity by meeting his beauty standards. David left that night, and he's continued to text and call, but I've blocked his number except for a co-parenting app where we can coordinate kid stuff. He's been telling mutual friends that he made a mistake and wants to work things out, but that I'm being stubborn and unforgiving. Several people have suggested I should consider counseling or giving him another chance, for the kids' sake. What those people don't understand is that I've never felt more confident about a decision in my entire life. David showed me exactly who he is when he thought he had better options, and I believe him. He's not sorry he cheated. He's sorry he got caught and that his affair partner wasn't interested in a real relationship with him. He's not sorry he blamed me for his choices. He's sorry those choices had consequences he didn't expect. I've started seeing a therapist individually to work through the emotions of divorce and help me be the best single parent I can be. I've also been spending more time with friends I'd neglected during my marriage, and I've realized how isolated I've become trying to manage David's moods and expectations. The kids are adjusting well to our new normal and seem happier overall. The divorce should be final in about 3 months. David has agreed to joint custody and reasonable child support, probably because his lawyer explained how his adultery would look in court. He's rented an apartment across town and sees the kids every other weekend and 1 evening per week. The kids seem to enjoy their time with him, but they always seem relieved to come home to me. It's been 3 months since David moved out, and 2 months since that pathetic scene on my doorstep, and I have to say my life has improved dramatically. The kids and I have settled into a routine that works for all of us, and I'm constantly amazed by how much more peaceful our home feels without David's constant negativity and criticism. Emma and Jake have both adjusted better than I expected to the new living situation. Emma initially asked a lot of questions about why Daddy couldn't just say sorry and come home, but she seems to understand now that sometimes grown-ups make choices that can't be undone. Jake has actually been more affectionate and talkative since David moved out, which makes me wonder how much his father's moods were affecting him even when I thought we were hiding the tension. David has been consistently late for his scheduled time with the kids, and he's canceled twice in the past month. Once because he had a work event, and once because he said he wasn't feeling well. Both times the kids were disappointed, but not devastated, which tells me they're not as attached to the routine as David claims they should be. When he does take them, he tends to overcompensate with expensive outings and too much junk food, then brings them home wound up and cranky. The most interesting development has been learning what my friends and family really thought about my marriage. My sister admitted that she'd been worried about me for the past year because I seemed stressed and unhappy all the time. She said David had become increasingly controlling and critical, and that she'd noticed I'd stopped talking about my own interests and goals. My best friend from nursing school said she'd seen the signs of emotional abuse, but hadn't known how to bring it up without seeming like she was attacking my marriage. Several of my colleagues have shared their own stories about marriages that ended due to infidelity, and I've been struck by how many of them describe the same pattern of gradual criticism and blame that I experienced. One of my friends said her ex-husband had an affair, and then spent months trying to convince her it was her fault for not being attentive enough to his needs. Another colleague said her ex had blamed their marriage problems on her weight gain after having kids, even though he'd gained 40 pounds himself. I've also learned some interesting things about David's affair through mutual friends. Apparently, Rebecca had a reputation at the gym for dating married men, and dropping them once they became actually available. She'd been through this exact pattern with at least 2 other guys in the past year, leading them on with promises of a relationship until they left their wives, then losing interest once the thrill of the forbidden was gone. David's coworkers have also been talking, and from what I've heard through the grapevine, his work performance has suffered significantly since our separation. He's been distracted, missed several important client meetings, and has been generally difficult to work with. His boss apparently had a conversation with him about getting his personal life sorted out before it affected his job permanently. The funniest part of this whole situation has been watching David try to date again. According to a mutual friend who saw him on a dating app, his profile emphasizes how much he loves kids and family time, and how he's looking for a serious relationship with someone who shares his values. He's apparently been on several dates, but nothing has worked out, possibly because most women his age can see right through the recently divorced dad routine. Meanwhile, I've been rediscovering who I am outside of being David's wife and the kids' mom. I started taking a pottery class on Saturday mornings when David has the kids, and I've been reading again for the first time in years. I've also been going out with friends occasionally, and have realized how much I'd missed having adult conversations that didn't revolve around David's work stress or our family logistics. The biggest surprise has been how much better I feel physically. I've lost some weight without even trying, probably because I'm not stress eating constantly or drinking wine to cope with David's moods. I've been sleeping better, have more energy, and several people have commented that I look happier and more relaxed. It's amazing what removing a constant source of criticism and negativity can do for your overall well-being. I've also been able to focus more on my career now that I'm not constantly managing David's emotional needs and schedule. I've started picking up extra shifts when the kids are with their dad, and I'm considering applying for a supervisory position that opens up next year. David used to discourage me from taking on more responsibility at work because he said it would interfere with family time. But now I realize he just didn't want me to have more independence or success. The divorce was finalized last week, and I felt nothing but relief when I signed the papers. David tried one last time to convince me to reconsider, sending me a long letter about how much he'd changed and how sorry he was for everything. He said he'd been going to therapy and had realized how much he'd taken me for granted, and that he wanted a chance to prove he could be the husband I deserved. I didn't respond to the letter, but I did keep it, as a reminder of how easy it is for people to promise change when they're facing consequences for their actions. David had 12 years to be the husband I deserved, and he chose instead to blame me for his unhappiness and look for validation from other women. I'm not interested in giving him a 13th chance to disappoint me. The kids seem to be thriving in our new normal. Emma has become more independent and confident, and she's been helping more around the house without being asked. Jake has started sleeping through the night consistently for the first time in months, and his preschool teacher says he seems much more settled and happy. Both kids still love their dad and enjoy their time with him, but they clearly see our house as their primary home and source of security. I've been asked several times if I'm interested in dating again, and honestly I'm just not there yet. I'm enjoying being responsible only for myself and my kids, making decisions without having to consider someone else's fragile ego, and not having to worry about whether my appearance or behavior is meeting someone else's expectations. If I do decide to date eventually, it will be with someone who sees my stretch marks and my mom body as evidence of strength, rather than failure. The most important thing I've learned from this entire experience is that I don't need someone else's approval or validation to feel good about myself. David spent months trying to convince me that I was the problem in our marriage, that I wasn't trying hard enough or caring enough about his needs. But the truth is, I was an excellent wife and mother who deserved better than a husband who would cheat and then blame me for driving him to it. I'm proud of how I handled David's betrayal and his pathetic attempts to justify it. I didn't beg him to stay or promise to change myself to meet his expectations. I recognized that his behavior was about his own character flaws and insecurities, not about anything I had done wrong. I chose to protect my self-respect and my children's well-being over preserving a marriage that had become toxic. Looking back, I can see that David's affair was probably inevitable, given his entitled attitude and his tendency to blame others for his problems. If it hadn't been Rebecca, it would have been someone else eventually. I'm just grateful that it happened now, while I'm still young enough to build a new life, rather than wasting more years trying to meet impossible standards set by someone who is never going to be satisfied anyway. My advice to anyone dealing with a partner who cheats and then blames them for it is simple. Believe them when they show you who they are. Don't waste time trying to prove your worth to someone who has already decided you're not enough. You deserve to be loved and respected as you are, not as someone else thinks you should be. And sometimes the best thing you can do for your family is to remove the person who's making everyone walk on eggshells. The kids and I are building a happy, peaceful life together. And David? He can either be a positive part of that as their father, or continue to be a cautionary tale about what happens when you take good people for granted.